There are a lot of questions have been asked about the Patriot Act, some concerned about civil liberties. I can tell you nobody is more concerned than I am about those civil liberties. And as a freshman here in Congress, on the Judiciary Committee through whom that bill goes, I had concerns about it. But I was reviewing the entire bill. I did back then. I continue to monitor that. A year ago, with the Democrats in the majority and with Speaker Pelosi in charge here in the House and with Obama in the White House, it was renewed for another year. And the reason it was renewed was for 1 year was so that we could have hearings to see if there had been any abuses. But in the meantime, there's been a lot of misinformation about the Patriot Act, about things that simply aren't true. And there are a lot of American citizens that are concerned about invasions of their privacy, just as I was before I ever read the Act, so that people know what's involved. And you can get a copy of the Act, and we can post that on our website too, where you can go through it and look at it. But I made myself some notes here. First of all, no American citizen is subject to the provisions of the roving wiretap or the use of this to get business records, things like that, unless they meet one of two criteria. Number one, they are an established agent of a foreign government, or number two, they are established member of a terrorist organization that has been listed as a terrorist organization in our State Department records. So for any American citizen that is not an established agent for a foreign government or has not established clear ties to a known and listed terrorist organization, it can't be used. Now, that said, one of my concerns in 2005, and one continuing concern is, has it been abused? Have people who do not meet those criteria had information gained from them? Because I wanted to know that stuff. So for the 6 years I've been in Congress, or 5 years since this bill came before us for renewal back in '05, I have gone to every classified briefing. I've gone through all the information about any mistakes that have been made, all this kind of information. I've looked at all that. And people don't have to worry. If you're not a known agent for a foreign government, established agent of a foreign government, or you don't have established ties to a known and listed terrorist organization, you're not covered. Also, you ought to know that Section 215, the one that allows the recovery of some records and things, that is not allowed unless the person getting it goes through a federal judge. That's a warrant. It meets the requirements of the First, Second, Fourth Amendment, Fifth Amendment. It is met through this because they have to go through a nominated and confirmed federal judge who sits on the FISA court. Those are federal judges that have been through the process, who know what it is to, well, some of them don't do a very good job of knowing the Constitution, but they're supposed to. They take an oath to defend the Constitution. So it's just like getting a subpoena, except it's a lot tougher because you have to get it from a federal judge. Another thing, some people have the understanding that a roving wiretap allows them, the federal government, to go after any conversation that's floating around. The fact is, since there have been telephones, the federal government and state governments have had authority to do wiretaps of specific landlines. But in order to get a wiretap, you had to establish with a judge that there was probable cause to believe a crime was being committed, and then the judge would authorize a wiretap on a specific landline. Well, things have changed. You know, it's not quite half yet, but it's moving toward half America not even having landlines. People use cell phones. And so all this does is say that a person can be the subject of a wiretap instead of a landline. so that the federal government can specifically target whatever phone the person from which there's probable cause to believe they're committing illegal activity, that they are using that phone. That's the target. And as we know many of the terrorists do, they will use throwaway cell phones. You see them in the stores, anybody can get them, the terrorists are using them. So instead of having the archaic language in the warrant that allows the wiretap, you're not tapping a specific landline phone. You can still do that if a judge authorizes, but you are tapping into the wireless communication of a person. And that's why it's called a roving wiretap. It's not just people roving around trying to get information with cell phones. They're only authorized through this Patriot Act to target specific phones in a specific person's hands. They're not to monitor anybody else's. A couple other tidbits. The FISA court judge is the only one that can authorize a roving wiretap. So it's really pretty specific. American citizens are pretty well protected. I'm not as concerned about the language, although there's some things that definitely need tweaking, and I'm hoping to see that when we have a full package come December that will address some of my concerns. But my concern is, what abuses have there been? And anybody following the news today has heard Secretary Napolitano saying, we are at more risk today than we've ever been since 9/11. And so that is why this stuff's important. All we're doing is extending this. I was not going to support, and I would not have voted for, and didn't vote for, a permanent extension. It's only to December to give us time to have hearings to find out what, if any, abuses there have been. And anybody that doesn't produce the information that we will subpoena, that we will have access to, some of it will have to be classified, then they've committed a crime if they don't produce that information. Once we've had all of that, some in classified, some in public setting, then we can determine what abuses there may have been so that we can see what else needs to be done. But people also ought to know, in 2005, as a freshman in Congress, the chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Republican, didn't want sunsets on there. But I'd already seen, unless you have sunsets on a bill like this, the Department of Justice just tells you to go away. They will not give you the time of day. They won't respond to requests. And so it's tough to get it out of them, and then you risk having to go to court to get it. And in our case, I fought quite hard behind closed doors to make sure that there were sunsets on this bill, so that 5 years later, which was a year ago, it came up for sunset renewal, and the Democrats didn't have hearings like we should have had, like many of us were demanding, like many Democratic friends I have on the other side are demanding now. And I'm glad they are, because I've demanded them too, and we've been assured by the chairman of Judiciary, by the chairman of Crime, Terrorism, Homeland Security, I'm the vice chairman, we're going to have these hearings. We're going to have oversight. And we're going to see what abuses have been made, if any. And then we'll be able to decide how far this goes in the future. But I'm very concerned about people's civil rights being invaded, and I'm not going to support it. But people need to understand this has protected us from people who have those established ties with terrorist groups. So I would encourage any American citizen that you're safe, but if you've got those established ties with known and listed terrorist groups, you're going to need to be careful, because there may be a federal judge that authorizes a roving wiretap of whatever phone you're holding, or may authorize subpoenaing, in effect, your business records. So that's it. Be glad to answer any questions that you may have. You can let our office know. I'm still fighting for civil liberties, and I was the main proponent of doing that 6 years ago, and it will continue.